Good morning, everyone. Welcome to SAINTCON Day 2. Yes, 3 people are excited to be here. I'm Doug Hubbard. Welcome to my presentation, Why Data Breaches Aren't Like Plane Crashes But Should Be. I'm an information security engineer at the company Route. We're a software company. We've got an app. That's really all you need to know about that. Speaking to my employer, brief disclaimer, the words that I'm saying here are mine, not my employer's. Just always got to get that out of the way. All right, on October 29th, 2018, a Boeing 737 MAX departed from Jakarta on a routine domestic flight in Indonesia. Shortly after takeoff, the pilot struggled to maintain control of the plane as the nose continually pitched downward. And after what must have been an excruciating few minutes, eventually they crashed into the Java Sea. All 189 people on board were killed, unfortunately. The flight only lasted 13 minutes. That's actual picture of the wreckage. A few months later, on March 10th, 2019, a second Boeing 737 MAX ran into a similar issue. Ethiopian Airlines flight number 302 left Nairobi, Kenya, and the pilot immediately had the same issue, where the nose kept pitching downward. He lost control as well, and after several minutes of struggling, the plane crashed, killing 157 people on board 6 minutes into its flight. Now, the 2 crashes made international news. It was a big deal. Most likely, somewhere in the backs of your minds, you remember hearing about this. The Boeing 737 is a very venerable airplane that's been flying since 1967 and has serviced many, many, many flights. It's very reliable and well-respected. So how did these 2 plane crashes happen? The reaction was very swift from regulatory bodies, from airline manufacturers, airline companies, international governments, and law enforcement agencies. So people from all these different groups, all these different places got together, cross-discipline, shared notes, and investigated to figure out what happened. How did these 2 planes crash in the same way just months apart? Within days of the second accident, the global fleet of 737 MAXs were grounded, and not a single plane would fly for more than a year and a half. Boeing estimated that the loss of their groundings was $18 billion. So what happened? Well, the investigation revealed, after exhaustive review, that it was a combination of poor training, software errors, dangerous marketing, and mechanical failures. So the 737 MAX was a new version of the 737. The biggest difference was that the engine was larger, and this made it more fuel efficient and cheaper to operate. Their big selling point is that they said this is the exact same plane, just with a different engine. You don't need to have exhaustive new training. You don't need to have totally new parts. Just go ahead and add it into your fleet and keep operating. The problem was that's not entirely true. There were some differences. The primary difference that we're going to talk about is because of the change in the engine size, there was some change in aerodynamics. And that made it so during takeoff, occasionally, the front of the plane would actually pitch its nose up and risk a dangerous stall. Rather than trying to correct the aerodynamics of the problem, they decided to solve it with software. They put a sensor in the front of the plane that would measure what they call the angle of attack. If the plane ever started to pitch up too high, then automatically, without the pilot necessarily knowing, the rear tail would activate and cause the nose to come back down. And what had happened in both of these crashes is that that sensor had malfunctioned. And the plane was rising at a safe rate, but the software detected that it was going too high, and it forced the nose to pitch down. And you can look at the flight trajectory. The plane it goes up and down a whole bunch of times. The Ethiopian airline pilot actually recognized what was happening and deactivated this software, but by then it was too late. So what happened? Well, before any of these planes could fly again, they had to apply some things. First, they had to do a hot fix. They changed the software. They also improved the diagnostic lights in the cockpit, changed the UI, increased the training on the crew. They'd found that some pilots of the 737 MAX had only had 2 hours of training on an iPad prior to flying it, in addition to their normal training. And they also added the ability to override the software very quickly. So in other words, the airlines improved their technologies, processes, and training when operating this aircraft. And what's remarkable is that it wasn't just one company that did this, but it was every operator of the 737 MAX in the world had to apply these changes before they could fly again. Those 2 plane crashes were a tragedy, and it's awful that those people lost their lives. But all of these changes happened as a result, and it serves as a warning for future aircraft design. So in a very real way, the airline industry is safer because of these two accidents. And that's just how the airlines operate. When a crash happens, it's a big deal. There's lots of people who investigate. There's lots of cooperation and a lot of transparency. The fact that I can tell you all about this, even though I'm not in the airline industry, that we can go down to the second in many cases in plane crashes to describe what happened, shows how open they are about sharing this information. And as a result of doing this over the course of more than 100 years of flying in an airline is extremely safe. The odds of an American getting into a plane crash in any given year is 1 in 11 million. For comparison, the odds of you getting struck by lightning sometime in your life are 1 in 3,000. But we didn't arrive at this overnight. It happened gradually over the course of many years, and this safety record, in a very real sense, is paid for by the blood of the people who came before us. So let's compare that with the information security in the tech sector. Right? What would happen if the airlines treated plane crashes like we treat data breaches? So here's a fictional airline notification, right? We regret to inform you that 7 months ago, between March 10th and 23rd, we suffered a safety incident. Between 100 and 300 people may have been impacted. Many of those may have suffered minor bruises. An unknown number may have suffered loss of life or limb. We've hired expert consultants to figure out what went wrong and how to prevent future incidents. In coming months, those impacted will be contacted above and beyond what is required by law and receive credit monitoring. And most importantly, your safety is important to us. Now, what actually happened in this incident? On March 17th, the plane suffered an engine malfunction and crashed. All 212 passengers and crew were killed. Right? So this is a very different way of looking at how to respond to issues. So what? Why are we talking about this? Well, obviously this is a security conference, and even though the airline industry and the security industry are very, very different, I think there are lessons that we can learn from it. Data breaches are all around us and happening at what seems to be an increasing rate, and every data breach is a lesson for everybody else in the industry. In a perfect world, every data breach would have open transparency around what happened. What did the attackers do? What did they get away with? How are people impacted? And how can we stop it from happening? Now, there's a lot of reasons why we don't have that happen, right? And I'm not saying that everything needs to be totally open every time. But if we did have that happen, we'd live in a world where you'd never have the same data breach twice. Where once an attacker figured out a way to get into a company, everybody else would stop it, and they wouldn't be able to come back in. Now, the risk tolerance for airline travel is very different than the risk tolerance for working in the software industry or working in technology, right? Your date of birth being exposed is far different than risking a grisly death. But we can try and do things to make things better. We can promote transparency. We can hold vendors accountable for the mistakes that put their customers at risk. And I think we should. That's a great conversation. But many of the people in this room are not going to be the actual decision makers to put that into practice. So I want to talk about what can you do individually, how you can be a better security professional because of this. What can you do? You can learn from other people's dumb mistakes. So every data breach is a case study in what not to do, and in some cases, what to do after a breach. Experience is the best teacher, but that experience is very hard earned. Nobody wants to get that phone call that says, hey, it happened. But somebody who's gone through a data breach is going to be way better, not just at preventing breaches, but better responding to an incident, understanding how to handle PR, understanding how do you work with regulators, how do you communicate with the different entities in your company, and how do you manage the messaging. All of these things are things that we can look at that happen to actual companies and try and learn from their mistakes. When I first started getting into security, I was in college, and I only think I had one security class. And I said, you know what, this is pretty cool. I think this is what I wanted to do. But I knew I needed to do more, so I decided to read security news. And every day, I would just read a couple of articles about security news. And if something came up that I didn't understand, I'd go Google the term or look it up or look at what these OWASP top 10 things are and try to understand them. And it only took me about 6 months before I started to feel like I was understanding or becoming security literate. I knew I'd started to get it when I started to feel that warm blanket of cynicism just wrap me up when I started to hear about a data breach. So that's the principle. Let's learn from other people's breaches. Let's learn from those mistakes. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how we can do that with some examples. So I'm going to go through 2 examples about some data breaches that have happened in the last month or 2. And then what are the lessons we can tease through them? Because sometimes we've got limited information, and how do we pick that through? So the first one is a big case. September 15th this year, Uber suffered a data breach. Everybody in here probably is familiar with it. Does anyone here not understand what happened with Uber? It's okay if you raise your hand. All right. So I'll be really brief then. So September 15th, Uber suffered a breach from somebody who's believed to be related to the Lapsus hacking group. Lapsus is a group of predominantly teenagers based in the United Kingdom. They've been very successful at breaching a large number of brands starting at the end of last year and working through this year. What's interesting about them is they're in it for attention, I think. So they like to publicize what they do, which makes it great when you're trying to research what happened. So he breached Uber on September 15th, bragged about it in a lot of different places. He even answered questions from journalists about how he did it. He posted pictures online. And thankfully, some people at Uber also were so caught off guard that many of their employees also posted pictures on Twitter to kind of corroborate what happened. So I'm going to go through what allegedly happened. This is based largely on what the attacker said himself, but it seems to be a consistent picture from the different sources. So basic idea, you guys know what happened. He phished a contractor. He got the credentials, tried to log into a VPN. The VPN required multi-factor authentication, but it was a push notice on the phone. The keynote speaker yesterday mentioned this. And he just started hammering it, said, hey, I want to log in, I want to log in. The contractor kept getting little notices on the phone, is this you? Never clicked on it. Well, it wasn't working, so he contacted the contractor via WhatsApp, said, hey, I'm Uber IT. We're having a bit of a problem with our multi-factor authentication. If you want this to go by, you just have to click accept once, and then you'll stop getting the notices. And that's true. He clicked it, and the attacker got into the VPN. Once he was there, he looked around. It didn't take him long. He found a file share that contained a PowerShell script. And that PowerShell script had hard-coded credentials in it, admin credentials to their privileged access management system, or their PAM. Now, for those of you who don't know what that is, that's essentially like a software manager or a password manager. So think of this as being like LastPass or Dashlane or KeePass or any of these other ones. So once he got in there, he got admin passwords to essentially all of Uber's important SaaS applications. And yeah, game over after that. So what did he get access to? Well, he got access to source code. He got AWS and GCP admin, at least to some accounts, G Suite admin, domain admin, vSphere admin, financial dashboards, SentinelOne. He also got onto their Slack, and he started to make posts to the company. And he said, attention, I am a hacker. I have breached your network. And then he provided updates on all the different things that he was doing. People were so surprised by it that they thought it was a joke and started posting SpongeBob SquarePants memes, thinking, you guys are so funny. IT and security did not think it was funny. And they told everybody to log off of Slack. I don't know how they were thinking that was really going to help, but they didn't have many better ideas. And these are the screenshots that make it onto Twitter, these Slack conversations from Uber employees. And my personal favorite is the hacker actually went so far as to breaching their HackerOne account and then posted a notice. Uber's been hacked. And the HackerOne account has been also. This is the attacker who made it. There's been a lot of commentary on this, and I couldn't resist sharing. This is my favorite. I found this. Chris Powell on LinkedIn said, Uber's threat intelligence is amazing. They had the attacker on their own Slack providing minute-by-minute attack updates. Which is true. All right, so this was bad. This was really bad. Uber could take a decade to recover from this. Their only saving grace is that this guy was trying to publicize what he did, so at least they know what happened when it happened. But in this case, Uber is our teacher. It's fun to poke at them. Hopefully there's nobody here at Uber that I'm offending, but you guys know what you got. So let's learn. Now, Uber didn't do everything wrong. They did some things right, but let's learn from their lessons. So here's a couple of things that we can take from it. One, hard-coded credentials are dangerous. Yeah, no kidding. So make sure we don't put hard-coded credentials in source code. We don't put credentials in places where people are going to find it. Limit access to sensitive information. 9 times out of 10, when there is a data breach, it's because somebody wasn't following the principle of least privilege, right? This contractor had access to this PowerShell script. Now, even if you concede that this script exists, how many people should have access to a script that has privileged access to your password manager, right? Like very, very small, like maybe 2, 3, something like that. Now, again, I'm making guesses here, right? So I'm not going to say this is definitively what should have happened or what did happen. But when you're reading through these lessons, you kind of have to tease things apart and make some assumptions. And it's okay. I'm not testifying before Congress. This is not a criminal investigation. We're just trying to learn. So my guess is that if they did have carefully restricted access to this PowerShell script, what are the odds that this teenager in the UK was able to just happen to get the person who had access to this? I think that's probably not what happened. So I think that PowerShell script was probably much, much more widely available than it should have been, right? So that's an important thing. Know what your valuable assets are and prevent broad access to them. Ensure contractors have security training. That contractor was victim to social engineering. So when you hire contractors, make sure you understand what training they're getting. Put it in your contract. Who's providing the training? Is it you? Is it the contracting agency? How are we going to keep track of all this? Stay on top of all of it. And last, today's frontier identity is identity and access management. It's not firewalls that are keeping people out of our network and out of our customers' data. SaaS applications have our customers' data, right? That's the way the modern software is built and how a lot of IT agencies run. So making sure that you're carefully keeping track of those usernames and passwords is paramount to keeping your customers' data safe. Right, so that's just an example of a case study that you can go through and learn and pick these apart. Now, you guys aren't making any of these mistakes, right? Your companies are all good, right? So let's talk about another breach, and I like to do this one, a small one, to show that we can learn just as much from small cases as we can from big ones. So the city of Detroit had an issue just a couple of months ago. They launched a new retirement website where you could log in, to any employee of the city of Detroit could log in and manage their 401k, retirement contributions, all that. And a man logged into it shortly after launch, and he found all these links on the side. They said lists. And he started clicking around trying to figure it out. And wouldn't you know, one of them happened to be a spreadsheet that contained the names, birth dates, and social security numbers of his coworkers. Well, that wasn't right. So he could have just contacted their sysadmin and worked through it, and maybe he did. But he also contacted Fox News. So Fox News, a local affiliate in Detroit, ran an article about it, which is how I know about it, and investigated a little bit into what happened. Now, the city of Detroit apologized. They said, yeah, we understand this was a mistake. You did still need to be an employee to log in, right? So it's not like it's totally exposed. But they then hired a firm to come in and investigate the alleged data breach. And wouldn't you know it, they said, we've confirmed this is a problem, but only one person illegitimately viewed that data, who just happens to be the person who reported it to the newspaper. He looked at 68 different people. Those 68 people will get credit monitoring. No harm, no foul, we'll move on. So what can we pick apart from this lesson? So first off, broken access controls, which is what we have here, illegitimately accessing data that your user should not have access to, is number 1 in the OWASP top 10. Any amount of testing would have found this, right? So there should have been some security testing. Somebody should have looked at this. So make sure that you have security testing in place when you're running software and that you're checking for broken access controls. Probably some assumptions were made. Look, this is internal. It's only city employees. But yeah, they're still having a problem. And I love picking apart. My favorite part isn't always the technical aspects. It's the PR nightmare that comes afterwards when people make poor decisions on what they say. So what are the odds that, like, really only one person clicked on information that was available to everybody, right? You kind of have to read between the lines. A lot of times they'll say things like, no evidence exists that shows that more than this data was accessed. Typically, when you see that, I always think in my head, that just means they don't have logging enabled. Like, that seems the more logical explanation in how they don't have evidence is they didn't log any evidence. So insufficient security metrics and logging is also in the OWASP top 10 as well. So that's something you should pay attention to, because if you do have a data breach, that can change your conversation from saying we had one person get breached and we're confident that it was only one to possibly 1 million. We don't know how many people were impacted. So that's what I'm talking about. Now, how do we get these stories? Whenever I bring this up, people always ask me, yeah, but people don't like to report on it. They don't like to talk about what happened. How do we know? And it's really not that hard. Here's a couple of places that I like to look. I'll leave this slide up for a minute. It's in order that I find most important. Where should you start? Industry reports. Verizon and IBM do an annual report every year where they survey companies who suffer data breaches. Then they aggregate and anonymize that data. Now, that information is not going to tell you how they got hacked, but it's going to tell you what the most common things are and how much it costs. So do you know what the average cost of a data breach for a company your size and industry is? Because you should, because that's how you get budget. So read those. Google News is the best for me that I've found. Just type in data breach. You can set a filter saying the last 6 months or whatever. You'll learn really quickly. Some articles just don't tell you much. Like if I see anything about healthcare or finances, I'm not going to read it because hospitals won't tell you anything. They just say, yeah, we had ransomware. Twitter is surprisingly good. So love or hate Twitter, a carefully curated Twitter feed will tell you about security incidents before they become mainstream news. Right? So maybe create a second Twitter account that's just for consuming and just follow some security professionals. How do you find them? Well, you could just type in data breach in the search and just see who's making pithy comments about security and breaches and stuff and follow them, and then look at who they follow and follow them. Or come to a conference like this, and if you like the speaker, get their Twitter handle if they post it at the end of the slide deck and see who they follow. Again, great to consume stuff. A couple of tech and news sites that I love. Krebs on Security, he's a journalist who investigates security things. Great at investigating, but he's not an engineer, so just know that when you're reading it. But he does some great work in uncovering and connecting the dots between people. You know, who are these attackers? And he loves to specialize in spam, card skimming, and things like that. The register.co.uk, fantastic resource. They are tech news, but they do a lot on security. Since they are based in the UK, they focus more on the European stuff, but they're very cheeky. They've got quite a few clever articles. If I ever read about something in like CNN or the big mainstream media that talks about, hey, here's a data breach that happened. They never tell you why, because that's not what their audience cares about. Hop on over to the Register. They'll probably have a write-up about it. Oh, and last one I'm going to mention, Equifax. The Equifax data breach is just one breach, but it's probably the most published and documented data breach in human history. Congress brought them up, and they testified before the different committees and all that. It's all written up. It's like 80 pages, but I think only 20 of them are about what actually happened, and it's surprisingly accessible. So if you're having problems with management taking responsibilities for accepting vulnerabilities, show them that report, because that's what they're going to talk about in there. The last thing is, I think that using stories is a great way to teach others. A good percentage of our time as security professionals is not just securing systems, but teaching others how to be safe. And there's something in our DNA about learning from stories, right? That's why the fables have lasted so many generations. And it's so much easier to tell somebody, hey, here's a data breach that happened with some major online retailer, and here's how we're making that same mistake. And that conversation is a lot easier than, well, theoretically, what if attackers did this, then this, then this, then this? One way that I've tried to do this is I've created a presentation at the last two places that I've worked. They've both been software companies, called Who Got Hacked. I've been doing it for about 2 years. So once a month, we get together, all of engineering's invited, and we'll just talk about the news. We'll say, okay, here's 4 or 5 stories about who got hacked in the last month, what happened, what did they do wrong, and how do we stand up? Are we making the same mistakes, or do we have controls in place that are going to prevent that from happening? And a lot of times engineers don't know. We may have the controls, but they don't know that they're there. And it's been awesome. We've had a great time. We normally have around 15 to 30 people show up. And to think about that, it's essentially secure developer training. And we've got people voluntarily showing up. Like, how hard is it to get them to do 1 hour a year? But we got people showing up every month to do it on their own. And they love it. They love to talk about it. One thing that I always try and do is your meetings have to be fun. If they're boring, no one's ever going to come back, right? So I've done tons of stuff. I've written security poetry. I've written songs. We've told stories. We've held, I told stories with puppets once. That was great. We did trivia contests with gift cards. Companies only ever get hacked for like 6 or 7 reasons. So we made bingo cards, and every time we go, oh, this company got this, and we had prizes. YouTube videos, we played video games. Here's our Family Feud day. We did it on Zoom. I've got this fantastic gold sequin vest that I found. and we did prizes, and it was all set up. One time we talked about Facebook, and I did I told everybody I interviewed somebody at Facebook, and I was going to play the recording to talk in detail about what happened at Facebook. And here's a screenshot from that recording. It was pretty good. Zuckerberg had a lot to say that day. Just recorded my own mouth and stuck it on top of it. So anyway, that's what I'd like you guys to do. When you're thinking about your professional career, our key takeaways here, read up on current events, learn from every hack you hear about so that you don't do the same thing wrong, and use it to teach others. Now, I want to make sure that I follow my same principles here, that I want to make this meeting not boring. So to try and follow some of the same things that I did in my other meetings, I'm going to read to you. So I'm not that great of a musician, right? Hopefully we get this mic to work out with everything here. But I'm going to read to you, this is one of the things that I did. It's a little, I don't know what you'd call it, a poem, an intro, to tell our people of our company what my presentation was going to be. You guys hear that? Keeping data safe is hard to do. There will always be bad people who are clever, dedicated, and try hard to defraud, steal, and bypass our guard. To stay safe from the bad guys, why not learn from those who are less wise? You can read about them in the news, about the CEOs and managers whose failed policies, processes, and tools have led to lawsuits, best practices, and rules that we can discuss, analyze, and use. So sit back, but stay on track as we talk about who got hacked. Thank you. I'm going to give a few minutes to turn over for the next presenter, but if you got questions or want to talk, I'll be up here.